right, last week we looked at the majority of chapter 4, and we saw that elaborating on a very simple warning that had already been given. Chapter 4 is just kind of an extension of the argument or the point that was being made back in chapter 3, which is the danger of disobedience, the danger of unfaithfulness, the danger of not hearing or not listening, not heeding. And all those things really put on roughly equivalent terms, but he's spelling out the incredible danger there that in doing so, if you are disobedient, if you are unfaithful, you're forfeiting rest. You are forfeiting God's rest. That's what happened to Israel. They were unable to inherit the blessings that he had prepared for them. There was no other reason. There was no reason on God's end that they should not have had what he had planned for them. The reason, the deficiency, was all on their part. They didn't have faith. They didn't listen. They instead rejected him, and so they did not enter into his rest. God's wrath was raised against them. But that's something that God has wanted to do from the beginning, and he's telling us today, in an era sense, in the time that we are in the time of the Messiah, this right now that we have, today, there still remains that promise of rest. Israel didn't receive it. Even the generations afterward that are actually described biblically as having some kind of rest in some fashion, in some limited sense. Maybe they had an era of peace from their enemies, or they had a golden age of growth, or whatever it might have been, but they didn't cancel out this offer that God has had from the beginning, where he wants to enjoy rest with man. He demonstrated that in the week of creation by resting on the seventh day. He demonstrated that in the law by telling them on the Sabbath day, you rest and keep it holy and remember God in doing that. So all these reminders that have been given to the people are meant to show the importance of, the value of this rest, but that had not expired, that had not run out. They remain, they're available to us today, if we hear his voice, if we are not unfaithful, if we don't harden our hearts, all of those things that are of such great importance that he's mentioned. So, beginning in verse 14 then, we'll see the discussion turning back to a discussion of priesthood, specifically Jesus as high priest. This is an idea he's batted around a little bit before now, and is going to, in one form or another, occupy the next several chapters, really. This is going to run through all the way definitely until chapter 9 or so. But a kind of key consideration for his overall argument is priesthood. And so we're returning to that discussion here at the end of chapter 4. Let's begin reading together in verse 14. Seeing then that we have a high priest, a great high priest, who has passed through the heavens, Jesus, the Son of God, let us hold fast our confession. For we do not have a high priest who cannot sympathize with our weaknesses, but was in all points tempted as we are, yet without sin. Let us therefore come boldly to the throne of grace, that we may obtain mercy and find grace to help in time of need. For every high priest taken from among men is appointed for men in things pertaining to God, that he may offer both gifts and sacrifices for sins. He can have compassion on those who are ignorant and going astray, since he himself is also subject to weakness. Because of this, he's required, as for the people, so also for himself, to offer sacrifices for sins. And no man takes this honor to himself, but he who is called by God, just as Aaron was. So also Christ did not glorify himself to become high priest, but it was he who said to him, "You are my son, today I have begotten you." As he also says in another place, "You are a priest forever, according to the order of Melchizedek." Who in the days of his flesh, when he had offered up prayers and supplications with vehement cries and tears to him who was able to save him from death, and was heard because of his godly fear, though he was a son, yet he learned obedience by the things which he suffered. And having been perfected, he became the author of eternal salvation to all who obey him, called by God as high priest, according to the order of Melchizedek. And we'll leave off into verse 11 because that's shifting into a new discussion. All right, the topic here is priesthood, a great high priest. That's how he has described Jesus. Again, picking up a thread that he has mentioned several times already, especially in chapter 2, verse 17, and at the beginning of chapter 3, there in verse 1, a discussion of Jesus as priest. Now, we noted all the way back at the time. This was chapter 2, verse 17. I've been making a pretty good pace through Hebrews, so, usually in chapter 5 or chapter 4 of a thing, if we said chapter 2, that meant it was like last year, right? But this was only a few weeks ago. We're making a pretty good time through. So remember back a few weeks ago, we talked in chapter 2, maybe the kind of key kernel to extract from that, especially for our purposes. He described Jesus as being able to be, that he was sort of qualified for that priestly role, that he might be a merciful and faithful high priest. And those are sort of key qualifying traits as a priest. Since he is the mediator, since he is a go-between, he represents man to God and he represents God to man. That's sort of what a priest is involved in doing. Well, what you want in a priest then is one who's merciful. He's going to be understanding towards the people, but he's also faithful. He's going to be faithful and obedient to God. He's going to do what he's supposed to do and be holy and righteous and all these sorts of things, but he can sympathize and show mercy to the people that he is among. So Jesus, faithful and merciful as a high priest. Well, the discussion in chapter 3, verse 1 then began a discussion of Jesus' faithfulness. He compared him to Moses there. Moses was faithful over all God's house, but as a servant. And Jesus was faithful as a son, as the creator of the house. But he's really amplifying the idea there of Jesus being faithful. That role as high priest, he can do that because he is more faithful than any who have ever existed, even more faithful than Moses. And so now here in chapter 4, in these last 3 verses, really the emphasis is kind of on the second part of that, or really I guess it was maybe the first part, but the idea of being merciful as opposed to his faithfulness. So that's what he's looking at here. One who can sympathize with our weakness, one who is a great high priest in all ways. He can accomplish all parts of that role and that task. And he is merciful, and maybe that is the point of emphasis. But there's also a few things here that point out his preeminence, his magnificence, his difference to any other high priest, and especially to us. He's talked about him as a great high priest. And Aaron and his sons passed through a veil in their work as priests. They go into the Holy of Holies, or they go into the holy place first, and the high priest can go into the Holy of Holies one time a year. Again, he'll get into this discussion later on. But they pass through a veil. He says Jesus has passed through the heavens. He's kind of pointing out the area of where the work is being done and where they kind of belong in discharging their duties. Jesus has passed through the heavens. He's at the right hand of God. He's in a different place entirely. He understands us. He can sympathize with our weakness, but he adds one key difference between us and Jesus: he didn't fall into temptation. He was tempted in all points, but was perfect. He went through unblemished. So yes, there are those similarities, but there's also a great difference. But this is a very encouraging set of verses. And we find, not really for the first time, but here mentioned again, a key idea is this early theme in Hebrews of boldness. And it'll come up several times throughout the book. This is reusing the same word that we found back in chapter 3 and verse 6, that we hold the confidence and the rejoicing of our hope firm to the end. But this idea of being bold is something the Hebrews writer has a lot of emphasis to put on, which is notable, I guess, amongst the discussion of Christ's greatness and his holiness and his sinlessness and perfection and all these different things, and the greatness of God. And on the heels of what he's been talking about in chapters 3 and 4 with, God swore in my wrath, they shall not enter my rest. And they were unfaithful and they were disobedient, and God is angry with them. And there's a lot of things that could cause a person some anxiety or a little bit of worry about, yikes, I don't want to make God mad, or what happens when God does get mad? That's really bad. So you really have to be careful, don't you? You really have to walk on eggshells. But he says exactly the opposite in what the Christian is supposed to do. You don't shrink back. You don't live in fear. You don't fill yourself with anxiety. If you understand who Christ is, if you understand what he's done and what his role is, you push forward, you go in with boldness. Let us have that. Come boldly to the throne of grace. You come forward to God with confidence because of what Jesus has accomplished. Again, I think it highlights the magnificence of his work even more so in light of all of these pictures of God's holiness and his terror and his power and how angry, how displeased he is with unfaithfulness. But all of that can be wiped out when a person is in Christ. When he has Christ as his high priest, he can come forward to the throne and say, I'm where I need to be to find God's mercy and grace, and have every expectation that he will find it. Really like what Neil Lightfoot says about that. The religion of Christ is the religion of access to God. That is a common theme throughout the New Testament, that's what you have with Jesus. You have access to God. You can walk in the front door. You belong in that place. His house is your house. And constantly that kind of affirmation is given. But that's what he's telling us to do there in verse 16. Draw near, come boldly, come forward, come to him. Really an encouraging thought. So, there in the end of chapter 14, yes, we've had a lot of stern warnings and frightening things and talk about failure, but we're ending on a pretty positive note. The mercy and grace of God are what is ultimately being held up as eminently available and what Christ specializes in providing. Okay, again, I think this follows into chapter 5. We'll continue seeing similar things, but before we move on into that, anything else? Comments, questions, further ideas here on chapter 4 before we do move on? Steve, go ahead. Sure.
On our part. It's faith that God's going to have mercy on us if we try to live according to his word.
Yes.
That's the way I understand that. Not any sort of pride. Look how good I am. I can go boldly to God without sin in my life.
Yes. No, confidence is a different thing than self-confidence. And that's even a different thing than terribly placed self-confidence. Yes, it is not the same as saying, I belong here because I belong here, by right or by nature or whatever it might be. You've been qualified to belong there. You've been qualified to be able to come near and draw near to him with that boldness. It's a confidence that is in him, not in any of our own merit. Good.
And then the other thing was, I hate to go back to verse 12 where it talks about the word of God being sharper than two-edged sword. When it talks about being able to divide the soul, the spirit, the joints, and the marrow, thoughts, and intentions, that kind of breaks down into, spiritual things, physical things, and mental things. And so you think about God's looking at all of our being. We're not looking at some kind of superficial expression as a Christian. I go on Sunday and so I check the box.
Yeah.
Are we living the life? Are we doing what he says out of faith? That's how we judge.
Yeah.
Inside out.
Very good point. A completely incisive look into every part of you. That's what God has. That's what the Word is able to provide, is that, kind of x-ray into the deepest part of your soul. Yeah. Brother Ellis.
The last part of verse 16 kind of hits me in the heart. And find grace to help in time of need.
Yeah.
So Jesus demonstrated what that was. And we in turn must help one another.
Definitely so. Within that, I think there's an example to follow. But what a great way of couching that sentiment and of presenting that to us, that, when it is available, when we most need it. It's in the time of need. It's when you find yourself lacking. And his immediate concern here is salvation and is, I think, alleviation of sin. He's in all of this priesthood talk and offering for sin and things such as that, but I think that expands broad to make that a general statement. The time of need. Need for what? Well, anything, whatever it is, he's able to address and surpass all of those needs. All right, continue on into chapter 5 then, and we're going to get back to this idea of sort of qualifications. I want to note from the beginning, just because it can kind of trip people up, I guess, especially based on what we're going to start seeing when Melchizedek is talked about, and that'll be much more at the forefront in chapter 7. Ultimately, a concern is he's comparing and contrasting Jesus as priest and Aaron as priest, but he's going to be talking in pretty general terms in the first 4 verses when he's talking about a high priest. And he's going to talk about things they do or things you want out of them or what qualifies them to do that. But those are in a general sense. They would have application to any priestly order. Jesus is not a priest like Aaron. So when he's talking about what you want from a priest, and they understand all those things from the law, and that's where everything would be discussed, but that's not the kind of priest that Jesus is. He doesn't follow after Aaron's priesthood. Again, that'll be kind of the point of the argument coming up here really soon. So Jesus is qualified as a high priest in that general sense. He wouldn't be able to be a priest like Aaron was. He wasn't from the right family. He didn't have the right heritage. That would not have worked, I guess, for a variety of reasons. So, looking in general at a high priest, especially from these first 4 verses or so, but going beyond it as well, I guess, what kinds of things are required for a high priest? This could be either, character or something they need to do or just a qualification for the office. What are you looking for when you're looking at a high priest? Yeah, Gary?
What we know about Melchizedek is very limited.
Yeah.
We know that he was. We don't know when he started. We don't know when he ended. So in that sense, he is a priest forever.
Yeah.
Like Jesus. And that's the comparison that needs to be made there. That's the difference between Melchizedek and those that were appointed like Aaron.
Yeah. And that point is going to take on a lot of significance here before too long. I think already he has that in view. But in general terms, for a priest, Ian? Okay. No. Not today. No, don't wait 3 weeks. Right. Okay. That exemplary behavior before the people that you're serving as priest for, a righteous life, holy conduct, that you are acting as what kind of on the ground level we all understand almost implicitly, without anything even needing to be spelled out, what you would want from your priest. You want him to be kind of the best guy that you have. He's the guy that's going to God on our behalf. We don't want to send the town drunk up there. We don't want to send somebody who is going to do some reckless, foolish thing. No, we're going to send the best that we have, and that's who is going to talk to God on our behalf. Well, okay, he's going to live this kind of blameless life, ideally. So we've got some conduct, I guess, that's going to qualify or disqualify. Steve?
So he's also supposed to offer gifts and sacrifices.
Okay.
He's supposed to be
Okay, he, as we saw earlier at the end of chapter 4, he can show compassion to people. He is involved in the sin business. He's making offerings for sin. He knows that that is a big part of the reason he's there is because these people have something we need to take care of between ourselves and God. We need to kind of be reconciled, and so the offerings that I make will be able to do that. But as he points out, and as Steve has kind of alluded to there, he's not doing that just for the people, is he? What does the Hebrew writer say? He's making those offerings for me too, because I also sin, and I also need those sins to be taken away. So the sacrifice is for me as well as for you. We're all in the same boat. The priest recognizes that. How does he get where he is? Who makes a priest a priest? Well, appointed by God. Okay, we've got a kind of divine calling that is in play here. And similar to what Steve said as well, this is a role that he's doing something. He's taking on an active role that is a service role. It is a leadership role, but it's not king of the world kind of thing, and he's telling all the peons at the bottom of the mountain what to do. He's a servant. He's doing something on behalf of others. All right, briefly consider just a few of those. We've already sketched out several of them. He's appointed by God. Several words indicate that. He's taken or selected. He's appointed by God or called by God, our writer tells us. This is not a career path you can just kind of choose. My granddad was a priest, and I always thought that was kind of cool growing up, and so I wanted to do that too. Or went to a career fair, and I saw, their presentation, and they made it sound like it could be kind of a rewarding thing. So I think I'll go into the priesthood. You can't just kind of fall into it that way. It's appointed by God. He has decided who can and who can't be. And in the case of the high priest at the very beginning, it's not just here are the possibilities for who can be a priest. It is, Aaron, you are the high priest. You are the guy. I am choosing you specifically to do this. So, appointed by God. It's a position of honor. God chooses this carefully. It's not just kind of left up to happenstance and, we'll get whoever we get as priest, and we'll just sort of live with it. Note, I do have to add the disclaimer here. Our author is speaking as we must have to speak in ideal terms. Israel's history certainly would demonstrate that this was very far from the case in reality a lot of times. We talked in intertestamental history several months ago, and we talked at length about some of the priests that they had there, especially during that time, who were wicked men and who would buy the office from the Romans or from whoever else it might have been. So we're speaking just in ideal terms as God had actually set things up. All right, another quality, maybe kind of just generally speaking, but that phrase is mentioned there in verse 1, every priest taken from among men. Maybe it's implied, maybe it's just kind of taken for granted or goes without saying, but a priest is a human being. He's taken from among men. He's one of you. He's from among you. And so he has all of those things in common with you. He's mortal. He's not a superhero. He is just a man. Closely related to that is what Brother Fisher was mentioning, his capability to show compassion. They know their own weakness. They know their own susceptibility. They know their own sins that they are going to have to make offerings for. Now, this isn't moral weakness that he's talking about when he mentions being subject to weakness in verse 2. It's just basic human imperfection. Sometimes you slip. Sometimes you fall. Sometimes you do something that you didn't want to do, that you wouldn't have done if you were thinking clearly. And so because of that, he can sympathize. He can have compassion on those who are ignorant and going astray. Chapter 5 and verse 2 tells us. And fourthly, finally here, the idea of a priest taking on a service role. Verse 1, he tells us that he's appointed for men in things pertaining to God. So acting as that go-between, he's offering gifts and sacrifices. He's offering them to God on behalf of the people. He's doing something for you. He's doing something that you benefit from as the people that the high priest works for and among. That's his main function, to help He's helping you maintain your relationship with God. Yes, it's a position of honor, but it is absolutely a position of service. He's that mediator between the two parties, between God and man, and he does something. He performs what is needed to remove sin. All right. Where he's moving to then in verse 5, I guess very clear to see, we can anticipate really where his argument is going. So these are some of the things you want from a priest. Well, let's ask then, okay, is Jesus qualified? We've already mentioned him back as early as chapter 2:17, saying he's our high priest. He can do that. Well, let's look now with this new set of qualifications. Does he fit with that? Is he appointed by God? Well, chapter 5 and verse 5 said he didn't glorify himself to become high priest. He didn't just decide that that was going to happen. Even Jesus, even the Son of God, is in that role because the Father glorified him, because the Father appointed him, because the Father anointed him to do those things. Humanity, can he sympathize? Does he know what it's like? Does he know about human weakness? Well, chapter 5 and verse 7 talks about in the days of his flesh, he had this trial. He took on our form. Chapter 2 really made a lot of that idea that the captain of our salvation, the pioneer, the forerunner, did the same thing we do. He took on flesh and blood, so he knows. And because of that, he can have that same compassion. He was tempted as we are. He can sympathize with our weakness. And he is absolutely one who followed in a service role. After he had purged our sins by himself, chapter 1 and verse 3 told us, he sat down at the right hand of the power on high. He's a mediator. He works tirelessly on our behalf. He is an author of eternal salvation. He has done these things that perform a service for us. Well, that's the gist of his argument. That's the primary idea that our writer is trying to get us to see. And again, he'll move further into a discussion of this after a brief break in chapter 7. We'll get back to the idea of exactly what kind of priest Jesus is. But this is what he wants us to see, that he can do this. He can fill this role. It's important to have a priest. You want sin removed. You want someone to be able to go to God on your behalf when you can't, or if you can't, or because you can't, because you are this sinful person, you need help getting there, so you want a priest. And he's saying, well, you have Jesus, and there's no one better suited, better equipped for this role. Now, with the remaining time, I want to just look at a few, just a few kind of notes of general interest that we have within this text after having seen that main argument. First of all, an idea that comes up in chapter 5 and verse 2, where we're told about the priest that he can have compassion on those who are ignorant and going astray, which is, I think, maybe a carefully chosen way of wording that and describing the ones that the priest understands and what he does sympathize with. Because repeatedly, there is a distinction made between deliberate, callous, intentional wickedness and evil, and, on the other hand, simple weakness and sin of ignorance or going astray. You see that distinction in the law. For time's sake, I'll just list those references, but the law makes quite a bit about intentional sin and sin of presumption, or sin that is, I knew it was wrong and I did it anyway because I wanted to, and I didn't care who saw, and I didn't care what God thought about it. I'm just going to do it. And it's kind of the idea of chapter 3, hardening one's heart as in a day of rebellion and having an evil heart of unbelief. That's a kind of similar idea, but there's a distinction made, a difference is drawn. In Hebrews, we're going to see the same kind of idea come up later in chapter 10 and verse 26, where we'll understand the most critical distinction between those two. It says, if we go on sinning willfully, there no longer remains a sacrifice for sins. He's talking about a different class of things with a different class of consequences, a very serious class of consequences or repercussions. So here he's talking about a priest who can have compassion on those who are ignorant and going astray. Now, this, I guess, can be looked at as a negative, say, oh, well, I need to be careful, or, you can't push things too far. Yes, but to our readers, and hopefully to us, that would be an encouraging thing to consider, because what has he called them before? Look back in chapter 3 and verse 1. How does he address these people that he's writing to? They are holy brethren that he's writing to. I don't think they're in the category of rebellion and willful sin that's continuing to go on, and this reckless, wanton disobedience that others might have. If they are sinning, it's weakness, evidently. And so, they can have what he's talking about there in verse 2. He can have compassion, or some translations, I like the reading there, he can deal gently with those who are ignorant and going astray. He can deal gently with you. Jesus can deal with you this way. If you are not rebellious, but you sin, you have missteps, you have faults and flaws because you are a person like everyone else is, he understands. But there is a difference between the intentional and the unintentional, one that is worth observing, I think. Think of this 110th Psalm as well. Another point I think we can observe. We've seen a quotation from this earlier. Chapter 1, verse 13. Sit at my right hand till I make your enemies your footstool. Was said to the Son, evidently. That's the first verse of Psalm 110. Now, here in chapter 5, verse 6, he quotes the fourth verse of Psalm 110 with this talk about the order of Melchizedek. Returns to this idea, you're a priest forever according to the order of Melchizedek. Any importance, I guess, look at those or consider those two quotations together. What's that psalm really getting at? What do we get out of that 110th psalm, especially the way it's used in the New Testament or the way it's used here in Hebrews? You think of, I don't know, what significance that might have. And presenting both of those verses, both of those parts of that prophecy to us. You're a priest forever, according to the order of Melchizedek, and sit at my right hand till I make your enemies your footstool. Both of them, we see pretty clearly, I guess, who the speaker is and who he's addressing, who he's talking about. It's God speaking in both of them. He's talking about what I do for you, but that you in both is the Son. He's talking to or addressing or talking about the Son in both cases. But if you compare those two ideas together, okay, we have a priest, we have Christ. He's our man. He's the one who's going to talk to the Father for us. He's the one who's going to stand in between. He's the one that we're relying on. He's the one that's going to supposedly forgive our sins. He's the one that's going to make the offering, that's going to make the sacrifice. The question might come up, as would come up fairly, I guess, of any priest. Can he do that? Is that going to work? Is that going to stand up to scrutiny? Well, this priest that he's talking about is the same one that starts that psalm where he says, you sit at my right hand until I put everything under you. You are going to have all authority, you are going to have all power, and you are going to be here at the place of greatest prominence and influence and honor, at the right hand of the might on high, the right hand of God himself, the Father. That's where the Son sits. That's where he is. Is that going to work as priest? Is he going to be able to have God's ear? If you're okay with him, are you going to be able to be okay with the Father? Yes. Yes, he's exactly where you want a priest to be. This is exactly what someone would be looking for, is to have one of that power and of that reputation and of that placement right next to the Father. Another encouraging thing. Psalm 110 will come up again, and it's, well, I think, a pretty important psalm to the New Testament as a whole. Let's talk about it a little more with this Melchizedek idea. This priesthood, the order of Melchizedek, he'll come up again in chapter 7. He needs to take a little bit of time to rebuke them throughout chapter 6. But a couple of things I think are important about it. Now, Gary mentioned one idea earlier, which is that with Melchizedek, who is his father? Who's Melchizedek's father? We don't know. What tribe was he from? He didn't have a tribe as far as we know. He wasn't even an Israelite. There was no Israel. There's only an Abraham at that time. So we don't know where he came from. How old was he when he talked to Abraham? I don't know. How long had he been a priest? I don't know. Who was priest after him? I don't know. I mean, you're getting the point. You're going to keep getting I don't knows for these. Why? Not just to make him this mysterious guy and, we don't know where he came from, and maybe he's still alive out there. Maybe, I don't know any of those kinds of things, but the primary point that he's looking at here is to say, none of that matters, because his priesthood isn't a hereditary thing where it's, I was priest, and now my son's priest, and then his son will be, and so you just follow the stair steps on that, or you follow the branches of the family tree, and that's where you get to the next one. This isn't that kind of priesthood. It's not like Aaron's. Don't be thinking about an Aaron, a Levitical priesthood when you're thinking about how Jesus is priest, because he follows after Melchizedek. His is of an entirely different order. It's not based on occupying a hereditary office, which is the same way it would have been for Aaron and Eleazar and anyone else who would have come after him, a different thing. What true significance, I guess, does that have if he's talking about the priesthood of Jesus? Why does that matter? Does it matter that he is the priest of this kind?
He offers true salvation, whereas the others only go towards what sins and forgives it.
Okay, there's a kind of, especially in the offering that's made, it's a different kind of offering that will be made under that system. Yeah, Ian. Yeah.
And then also just kind of thinking about the King of Righteousness bit. The King of Righteousness means several different things. I think, one, he is righteous himself. Two, he's kind of, you can say, in charge of righteousness and a source of righteousness, and he leads us into that of himself.
Yeah.
So it's a lot of different ways in which that righteousness manifests itself that is not found in a human high priest, no matter how Levitical one they would be.
Yeah.
They are not themselves fully, truly righteous, and they don't bring it about upon their kingdom.
Yeah. Might be able to model it a little bit themselves, but they can't dispense it to anyone else. They can't secure it for anyone else. That couldn't be as well. But I think, yeah.
Israel wasn't a nation yet either during this time.
Yeah, this all predates.
This is all predating that.
Absolutely.
Same order here, there's not going to be.
And that'll be his point in chapter 7, that we're not talking about a subordinate thing. We're not talking about anything that's lesser than.
Right.
It's older and comes from one greater than the ancestor of Israel, evidently, since Abraham pays him a tithe. But I think the primary idea, I guess, that we're looking at is this is something that's eternal. How long is Aaron priest? Well, he's priest until he dies, and then that's the end. He's not the high priest anymore when he dies. Then his son is high priest. How long is he? Well, for as long as the rest of his life is, and then so on and so on and so on. And then, as Ian has pointed out, when the law is done away with, then really none of those men are high priests as far as God is concerned any longer. But this, as the language of the psalm says there, chapter 5, verse 6, as quoted, you are a priest forever, according to the order of Melchizedek. There will be a primary point of his argument later on that focuses on the fact that this is permanent. This is forever. He is your forever priest. He is the only one who is going to serve in this role. By the power of an invincible life, he will tell us. Jesus serves always at the right hand of the Father to make intercession for you. That always is the case. It always will be the case for the rest of your life. You will have this perfect high priest operating on your behalf. So the eternality of that office. Melchizedek doesn't pass it on to someone else. It kind of dies with him in a sense. And Jesus, since he doesn't die, has this ongoing, continuing priesthood. There is a little bit of connection, I guess. We see often Melchizedek is the king of righteousness, and the king of Salem is how he's described in Genesis when he meets Abraham, the king of peace, but probably just the place, Salem. But so he's a king and a priest. Well, that's similar to Jesus, isn't it? That he's a king and a priest as well. Hebrews writer doesn't really deal with this idea a lot. He really doesn't delve into really any ideas of kingship very much. I think probably for the reason that the first writers, those Hebrews who were reading this, were very clear on the topic of, yes, the Messiah is king. He's the son of David. He's our king. Very clear, no dispute, no discussion about that. So it's just not anything that he needs to treat with much interest. It's kind of a settled issue. All right, well, Nathan, I hate it when Nathan's right. He didn't think I was going to finish, and I didn't. But next week, especially these last two ideas, I just had two more ideas that I wanted to look at, and we can start with those next Wednesday. One is in chapter 5, verse 7, the prayers and supplications that are mentioned, the vehement cries and tears that the Son offers to the one who could hear him when he was on the brink of death. Consider that, what he's talking about there, and in what sense the Father can be said to hear Jesus, who was on his way to the cross. And then the idea in chapter 5, verse 8, he learned obedience by the things which he experienced. We've talked about that idea a little bit as well in previous lessons. We'll investigate a little further next week, too. All right, thanks so much. As always, appreciate your time.